This slide looking at spending on higher education for rich and poor in different African countries. Here we find that by far you can see that the largest share of the subsidies go to the richest 20%, while the lower share of the subsidies go to the poorest 20%. So in terms of higher education, this form of government spending is really not pro-poor. Back to South Africa, looking at the historical change in real per capita social spending from 1975 to 2006, and we compare this for black people and for white people. And clearly you can see the huge inequality in that per capita social spending in the 1975s. It was way higher for white people than black people. And moving over to 2016, you can see that that per capita social spending has decreased for white people and it is far higher for black people. However, that amount that is being spent on whites in 2006 is still far greater than what was spent on black people in 1975. If this figure showing Lorenz curves and concentration curves looks familiar, well, it should, because you covered it in our lectures looking at measurement of poverty and inequality. So if you can recall from those slides, what we are seeing here in terms of the health concentration curves for Kenya, you can see that when you look at total health spending, it is redistributive but weakly so. So it lies above the Lorenz curve, but it doesn't lie above the line of 45-degree equality. However, primary health care is redistributive and per capita redistributive. So if I look, for example, at the poorest 20% of the population in Kenya, what they get back in terms of the cumulative subsidy for primary care, it is a larger share than their cumulative share of the population. Now, if you recall, I said incidence could be broken up into two parts: your fiscal incidence, which covers who pays, and your benefit incidence, which covers who benefits. So there are ways of calculating benefit incidence, and for knowledge enrichment purposes, you can read through this slide at your own leisure. Once more, this figure should look familiar to you. You also covered it in our measurement of inequality course. So here we have Lorenz curves and social transfer concentration curves for South Africa in 1995. And you can clearly see that when we look at household income, it lies very far away from that line of inequality. So this represents a highly unequal distribution of income. However, when you look at social transfers, they lie very far above this line of inequality. So this is extremely redistributive per capita. And I can demonstrate again. If you look at the poorest 20% here of the population, what they gain in terms of social transfer benefits is 60% cumulatively, which is a far higher proportion than the proportion of income in society. So this would be very pro-poor, highly redistributive, or in other words, per capita redistributive. Right, by now you should all be very comfortable with reading concentration curves. So just looking at this graph, I would like you to tell me which of these social services in 2006 was very weakly redistributive. If you answered tertiary education, you were correct, because it lies, yes, it lies above the Lorenz curve, so there is some kind of distribution, but it is weakly so, and your rich tend to benefit more than their poor as a cumulative share of the population. Which of the social services are the most redistributive? In fact, per capita redistributive. If you guessed all social grants in 2006, you are correct, because this concentration curve for social grants lies the furthest above the line of equality, which means it is per capita redistributive, and it is really well targeted at meeting the needs of the poorest of the poor. You've seen this figure before. So over the period of time from 1995 all the way to 2006, how would you describe the targeting of social spending in South Africa? Has it improved or has it deteriorated? If you've answered that it's improved, you are correct, because you can see the concentration curve for all benefits in 2006 lies the furthest away from the line of equality, which means it is the most per capita redistributive compared to the benefits in 2000 and 1995. So in this bar graph, you can clearly see that the per capita benefits of social spending by income quintile has increased over the years from 1995 to 2006, irrespective of the race group. However, what you can see is that most of the benefits, not irrespective of the race group, but irrespective of the quintile. But what you can definitely see is that your quintile ones, your lowest income quintile, receives the most in terms of per capita benefits, while quintile 5, which is the top quintile in your income distribution, receives the least of the per capita benefits. So yes, there has been growth over time across all quintiles in terms of per capita benefits of social spending, but it is targeted in such a way that the poorest get more than the richest. A similar bar graph here looking at the trends from 1995 to 2006 once again. And here you can see the per capita benefits of social spending by race. It ends here. This is your total spending. And you can see that for almost all races except the white race, the per capita benefits have consistently increased over time. For the white race, it has decreased from 2000 to 2006. And there can be various reasons for this. White people may be opting out of public services such as public health care or public education. You can also see that your black, colored, and Indian populations receive more benefits than the white population, and it is divided according to who was most disadvantaged during the times of apartheid. So black people would get more, followed by coloreds and then Indians, and lastly whites. So this clearly indicates that there is also some kind of targeting to ensure that those who were previously disadvantaged are able to benefit more from social spending by government. So here's a very interesting bar graph. It shows the share of the poorest 40% in social benefit spending in 2006. So if we're only looking at the poorest 40%, you can see that for most of the different functional components of social spending, the poorest 40% gain far more than their share in society. So 49% for school education, 62% for child support grants. Public hospitals is about at the same point. And there are only 2 areas where they actually receive less than their share in terms of the income distribution, and that is tertiary education. They only get 5%. And with housing, they also only get 24%, which is lower than the 40% cumulative share of the population. And so housing and tertiary education is not per capita redistributive. Okay, this is not pro-poor, because in order to access housing, for example, you need to have an income, and we know that for many who are the poorest 40% in the country, they don't even have an income. When it comes to tertiary education, many of the poorest 40% in South Africa would not have had the sufficient basic education to meet the entrance criteria for going to higher education. So these aspects of social spending tend to benefit the middle and upper classes on the income distribution more so than the poorest. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because you've dealt with Bromberger in detail before. But I would just mention that secondary income is the power of disposal over public and private goods and services through market and fiscal processes. You've seen this before. This graph simply shows the effect of fiscal processes on distribution. If we look at your primary income here, the blue line, before any grants are disbursed, it lies super far away from the line of equality. When you look at secondary income, which is your income minus taxes plus social spending, you see it moves that Lorenz curve closer to the line of equity. So in effect, what it does is it aids the redistribution of income within South Africa. This slide is very similar. It looks at the effects of improved targeting. So if you look at, maybe let's start off with this line, income minus taxes plus social spending in 2006. You can see how far away it was from the line of equality. But over time, as targeting improved, by the time we get to 2006, you can see that the income minus taxes plus social spending, the secondary income, is far closer to the line of equity. So basically, over time, as government has gotten better at improving their targeting, they were able to move the secondary income Lorenz curve far closer to the line of equality, and the result of that is that you can see the Gini coefficient dropping and getting closer to 0, which is what we want. I won't spend too much time on these slides. It's basically exactly the same in terms of what you saw on the previous 2 graphs, but now the information is given to you in terms of concentration and Gini coefficients. Just remember that when we're looking at concentration coefficients, the more negative the coefficient, the better it is, the more pro-poor it is, the better targeted it is, the more per capita redistributive it is. When it